Hello everyone. So welcome to EduTap everyone and welcome to today's session. So today we are going to discuss a very important report of the Reserve Bank of India, that is the State Finances, a study of budgets of 2025-26. Okay. So this is the report that has been recently released by the RBI on its website, and this is the report that we are going to discuss, and we are going to have the important highlights from this report. And this report, it talks about the demographic transition, as well as it shows us the fiscal policy, as well as it shows us the fiscal stability of the state finances. It shows us about the finances of the state governments. Okay, so all of this we are going to discuss in the session, and this is going to be very important from your descriptive point of view as well as from your objective point of view. So this is the report of the Reserve Bank of India that is released once a year, and this is important from the examination perspective, from the descriptive as well as objective perspective. Now first of all, give me a thumbs up if I'm clearly audible, and I hope the screen is visible and I'm clearly visible. And good morning to all of you. So today let's start with the discussion about this report, that is the State Finances, a study of budgets of 2025-26, and we will discuss about the different chapters in the report. Okay, so shall we start? Okay, so now do give me a thumbs up if I'm clearly audible and visible. Okay, so let's start with this important report, and we will discuss that, okay, the question can come in the descriptive as well as the question can come in the objective form. So in what form the questions can come, that we will be discussing also. Okay, so now let's start with this report. But before that, do subscribe to the YouTube channel of EduTap so that you continue getting the relevant videos, and do join our Telegram channel where you will get the PDF of the session. So the PDF of the session you will get in the Telegram channel, and the link for the Telegram channel is provided in the description box below. Okay, so this is the idea. Now let's start with the State Finances, a study of budgets of 2025-26. So the RBI has recently released the report State Finances, a study of budgets of 2025-26. The theme of this year's report is demographic transition in India, implications for state finances. So if you are preparing for the NABARD examination, or if you are preparing for the RBI examination for 2026, remember that the demographic transition, the demographic trends, this is very, very important from your examination point of view, because in the ESI, in the syllabus, the population and the demographic trends, this is a part of your syllabus. Okay, and from this particular part, the questions have come in the NABARD also, in the RBI also. Okay, so this is important, and the data has been very beautifully shown in this particular report. So the theme of this year's State Finances report is demographic transition in India, which talks about the shift in the population patterns, the shift in the population structure, and how some states are in the aging category while some states are in the youthful category and the other states are in the intermediate category. Okay, and it also talks about the population of India and such. So in this particular report, we are going to discuss about the demographic transition in India, the shift in the population patterns, the shift in the population structure that is coming in India and in the different states. Okay, so we will discuss about the state-wise demographic transition in India and the implications for the state finances. If a state has a youthful population, so what is the implication? If a state has the aging population, so what is the implication for that particular state? How it will affect the state finances of the different states. So this is the idea that the RBI has released this report, and the theme of this year's report is demographic transition in India, implication for the state finances. Now this report, it provides a comprehensive assessment of the finances of the state governments. So we will discuss about the fiscal stability, about the fiscal variables. Okay, that is the variables related to the state governments and the state government's finances. Okay, so we will discuss the comprehensive assessment of the finances of the state governments for 2025-26 against the backdrop of actual data for 2023-24 and the revised or provisional accounts of 2024-25. Okay, so we are going to have the comprehensive assessment of the finances of the state governments for 2025-26. We will discuss about the fiscal variables, about the fiscal stability and such, against the backdrop, against the data of the actual and revised or provisional accounts. So we are going to compare the data. Okay, so now let's start with the highlights. And first of all, states consolidated gross fiscal deficit. What is gross fiscal deficit? Anyone has any idea regarding the data regarding the gross fiscal deficit? Deficit, first of all, is the expenditure that is higher than the receipts. Deficit means that we are spending more than what we are receiving. Okay, so that is deficit. So the government, it is the government deficit. That means the government is spending more than what it is receiving. So gross fiscal deficit has the formula: the total expenditure minus total receipts excluding borrowing, Okay, so that means the gross fiscal deficit, it means that the government is spending more than the receipts of the government excluding the borrowings. So in the gross fiscal deficit, or in the fiscal deficit, this is the formula: total expenditure of the government minus total receipts of the government excluding the borrowing. So let's say total expenditure is 500 crores, just some example. Total receipts of the government excluding borrowing is 350 crores. So fiscal deficit is how much? Yes, fiscal deficit is how much? So fiscal deficit is 150 crores, right? And if the fiscal deficit is 150 crores, that means this is the borrowing requirement of the government, because we have taken the total expenditure and the total receipts excluding borrowing. So if the total expenditure is higher than the total receipts excluding borrowing, then this higher total expenditure is being covered through the borrowings. Okay, so the fiscal deficit, it shows the total borrowing requirement of the government. If the fiscal deficit is 150 crores, this is the extra expenditure that the government is doing, and this can be covered through the borrowings. So the fiscal deficit shows the borrowing requirement of the government. Okay, so that means the consolidated, the states aggregate or the consolidated combined gross fiscal deficit increased to 3.3% of the GDP in 2024-25 after remaining below 3% during the previous 3 years. So you can understand that in 2024-25 the fiscal deficit has increased to 3.3% of the GDP. That means total borrowing requirement has become 3.3% of GDP for the government. And in the previous 3 financial years, the fiscal deficit was around 3% only. So there is an increase that we have seen in the fiscal deficit. In the total borrowing requirement, there is the increase for the state governments in the 2024-25. So this is the idea, okay? So since why it has happened? So basically, till 2023-24, the fiscal deficit was 3% of the GDP. That means the borrowing requirement was 3% of the GDP till 2023-24, okay? While in 2024-25, the fiscal deficit has increased to 3.3% of the GDP. That means the borrowing requirement of the state governments. So the consolidated fiscal deficit is 3.3% of GDP. That means the total borrowing requirement of the state governments, it is 3.3% of the GDP. The increase in fiscal deficit, the increase in borrowing requirement is mainly because here the fiscal deficit is what? Total expenditure minus total receipts excluding borrowing. So in the total receipts for the state governments, so here we are talking about state fiscal deficit. So in the total receipt of the state government is receiving the money from the central government, right? The state government, it receives the money from the central government in the form of grants. So central government provide grants to the state governments, and the state government is receiving the money in the form of grants. Now it was stated that there were lower grants that were given from the state, from the center to the state. So center has given lower grants to the state government, due to which there is the lower receipts for the state government, and that's why the fiscal deficit was higher. I hope this is making sense, that basically the state had the higher fiscal deficit of 3.3% of the GDP because of the total receipts that declined for the state government, as the central government gave less grants to the state government in this financial year of 2024-25. Okay, so since 2023-24, the gross fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP has moved upwards, reaching to 3.3% in 2024-25. So in the 2024-25, the state fiscal deficit has increased to 3.3%. The rise in fiscal deficit in 2024-25, this increase in fiscal deficit from 3% to 3.3%, this is mainly because of the lower receipts because of the lower grants that were given by the central government to the state government. So state governments received lower grants, due to which the receipts of the state government decreased and the fiscal deficit of the state governments increased. Okay, now despite the consolidated gross fiscal deficit increasing to 3.3%, So the gross fiscal deficit has increased to 3.3% of GDP, but remember that it is below the ceiling of 3.5% that has been imposed on the state governments. So the consolidated gross fiscal deficit of the state governments should not increase 3.5%. Okay, that is including 0.5% linked to power sector reforms. Okay. So this is the idea that despite the gross fiscal deficit has increased from 3% to 3.3%, but still the 3.3% of the fiscal deficit of the state is below the ceiling of 3.5%. So that means it is still sustainable. The problem is not very big. Sustained higher, as well as the focus was given as well as in the expenditure. Now the state fiscal deficit is higher and the total expenditure to the total receipts excluding borrowing, this is higher, right? But here you can see that the capital expenditure has increased from 2023-24 to 2024-25 in the terms of the expenditure, the total expenditure that has happened. So from 8.1 lakh crores to 8.9 lakh crores. So there is sustained higher capital expenditure that strengthens the quality of the fiscal adjustment, that strengthens the quality of the fiscal expenditure that the government is doing. So the government expenditure includes the capital expenditure, where the government spends to increase the assets of the government expenditure includes the capital expenditure, where the states are doing more expenditure for increasing the asset, okay, or for decreasing its obligations, decreasing its liability. While the government expenditure, the state government expenditure also consists of revenue expenditure, where the government is spending for its regular expenses, where the government is spending for its operations, okay, for salaries, subsidies, pensions and such. So state governments, they are spending like a good amount in the capital expenditure to increase the assets and to decrease the liabilities. Okay, so the state governments, they are spending more in the capital expenditure. They have started to have good capital expenditure, and the revenue expenditure that is also done by the state governments, but the capital expenditure is slowly increasing. Okay, so this is good. So sustained higher capital expenditure strengthens the quality of fiscal adjustment. So this is the basic idea. Remember that the state governments, they spend in the capital expenditure and revenue expenditure. Capital expenditure increases the asset, because capital expenditure, that means expenditure on the capital assets, on the physical assets, as well as decreasing the liability. Revenue expenditure is the regular expenditure of the government, where the government is spending on salaries, subsidies, pension and such, which is not increasing any asset, which is not decreasing any liability. So the state government expenditure, there is a sustained higher capital expenditure that is happening. So that is good for the country. Okay, so this is what we have discussed about the state's finances. Gross fiscal deficit has increased, but it is still lower than the ceiling of 3.5%, and the fiscal deficit mainly increased because of the lower grants from the center, and there is sustained higher capital expenditure that the state governments are doing. So that is good for the country. Now states' consolidated gross fiscal deficit increased to 3.3%. Now the fiscal deficit increased to 3.3% of the GDP, right? Now fiscal deficit, the consolidated fiscal deficit, it shows the borrowing requirement of the state governments. That means the borrowing requirement of the state governments, before it was 3% of the GDP, now it has increased to 3.3% of the GDP. It is said that this borrowing requirement of the state governments have increased, but the deficit that is exceeding 3%, this fiscal deficit that is exceeding 3%, or the borrowing requirement that is exceeding 3%, it is mainly reflecting the 50-year interest-free loans from the center under the special assistance to states for capital investment. What does this mean? So this is the article that you can see. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has provided an allocation of 1.5 lakh crore for the center's special assistance for capital investment scheme for the states in the budget 2024-25. So basically in the 2024-25, it was said that 1.5 lakh crore rupees of the lending will be done by the central government to the state government, and this will be under the 50-year interest-free loans. So this lending that will be done by the central government to the state government under the special assistance to states for capital investment. So here you can see that this is the special assistance that is given to states for the capital investment, for the capital asset, and this will have 50-year interest-free loans. Okay, so this is the idea. That means the fiscal deficit increased to 3.3% of GDP. So the borrowing requirement of the states, the state borrowing requirement increased to 3.3% of the GDP. Now this extra expenditure or this extra borrowing requirement of the government, this extra borrowing requirement of the government by 0.3%. Okay, because previously it was 3% of the borrowing requirement, now it is 3.3% of the borrowing requirement. So the extra borrowing requirement by 0.3%, this extra borrowing requirement of 0.3%, this is basically reflecting the 50-year interest-free loans from the center to the states, under the budget of 2024-25. So the borrowing requirement that has increased, basically this borrowing requirement or the borrowings that has been increased by the states, this is from the interest-free loans. So that means this is sustainable. This is not putting a lot of pressure on the state governments in the short term. So the deficit exceeding 3% or the borrowing requirement exceeding 3% mainly reflect the 50-year interest-free loans from the central government to the state government under the special assistance to states for capital investment, so that the state governments can spend more on the projects in diverse sectors such as the health sector, education, irrigation, water supply, power, roads, bridges and railways. So this is the center's special assistance to the states for the capital investment, and this is providing loans for 50-year interest free. Okay. So this extra loans or the extra borrowing that the states are doing, it is not putting much pressure on the state governments in the short run and can be returned. This loan can be returned in the long run, and this also has the interest-free criteria. Now, which is over and above, now this extra borrowing that the state governments are able to do at interest-free level. So this is over and above the normal net borrowing ceiling of the states. See, the total borrowing ceiling is 3.5%, right? The fiscal deficit or the borrowing requirement or the borrowings that the states can do is 3.5% of the GDP. So the consolidated fiscal deficit or the total borrowing requirement of the state should be having the ceiling of 3.5% of GDP, in which is including 0.5% for the power sector. If we remove this, that means the net borrowing can be done 3% of GDP, right? 3% of GDP, removing this extra 0.5% linked to the power sector reform. Okay, so this 3% is the net borrowing. It is the net borrowing ceiling. 3.5% is including the expenditure or the deficit for the power sector reforms. Okay, so this extra deficit that the government is doing or the loans that the state governments are getting, this is over and above the normal net borrowing ceiling of the states. Now the state quality of expenditure has improved with higher capital outlay and social sector expenditure. So the state's quality of expenditure is also improving, where the states are doing more expenditure for the capital asset and reducing its liability. So this is the idea. Any confusion, anyone? Yes, the state development loans, if they are loans, they come under the borrowings. Okay. In 2025-26, the states have budgeted a gross fiscal deficit of 3.3% of GDP. So in 2024-25 also, and in 2025-26 also, the fiscal deficit will be 3.3% of the GDP. Okay. Now that means in the 2025-26, the fiscal deficit will again remain higher at the 3.3% of the GDP. The thrust on capital expenditure was sustained as capital expenditure remained steady. So the thrust, that means a further push is given to the capital expenditure, and now it is expected that the capital expenditure by the state governments will increase from 2.7% of the GDP to 3.2% of GDP. Okay, so this is the idea that for 2025-26, it is expected or it has been budgeted that the gross fiscal deficit, the consolidated fiscal deficit of the states will be 3.3% of the GDP. And this will be because of higher expenditure that will happen in the capital segment. Okay, so the capital expenditure, it is budgeted that capital expenditure will increase to 3.2% of the GDP in 2025-26 from the previous capital expenditure of 2.7% of GDP in 2023-24 and 2024-25. So this is the idea that from 2.7% of the GDP, the capital expenditure will increase to 3.2% of the GDP by the state government. So the state governments are going to further increase their capital expenditure so that the assets can be formulated and the liabilities can be reduced by the state governments. Okay, so this is the idea. Remember the data from the 2025-26 gross fiscal deficit 3.3% of the GDP and the capital expenditure to increase to 3.2% of the GDP. So the government is going to have the higher fiscal deficit as well as the government is going to do higher capital expenditure. That is good for the country, that is good for the states. Now next is consolidated outstanding liabilities. Liabilities means the obligation of the state government to return the money. If the state government has taken the loan, the state government has the liability to return the money. The state government has the obligation to return the money. So the consolidated outstanding obligation or the total unpaid obligation, we can say, the total unpaid obligation, the total unpaid liability of the states declined to 28.1% of GDP at end March 2024 from a peak of 31% at end March 2021. So basically at the end March 2024, the total unpaid liability or the consolidated outstanding liabilities, the total unpaid obligation has reduced to 28.1% of the GDP. Okay. The improvement reflects both fiscal consolidation efforts. Fiscal consolidation efforts means that the state governments, they are taking efforts to reduce their fiscal deficit, to reduce their borrowing requirements. Okay, so this is the effort that is being taken by the state governments to reduce their fiscal deficit, to reduce their borrowing requirement and have the favorable debt dynamics. Favorable debt dynamic means that even if the state governments are taking the debt, they should take the debt at the favorable rates. And here you can see that the central government has promised to provide the 50-year interest-free loans under the Special Assistance to States for Capital Investment Scheme. So this is also a favorable condition. This is a favorable debt dynamic in which the state governments are getting the 50-year interest-free loans from the center. So this is a very favorable debt dynamic. So this is the idea that the state governments are focusing on reducing their fiscal deficit, reducing their borrowing requirement, and they are having the favorable debt dynamics. Now the outstanding liabilities, that is the unpaid obligation, are budgeted to increase to 29.2% of GDP by the end of March 2026. So by the end March 2026, it is expected that the outstanding liabilities are going to increase to 29.2%. In spite of or despite of the elevated debt level, indicators of debt sustainability remain favorable. That means the state governments, they are capable, they have the capacity to service the debt, to pay the interest for the debt without any stress, without any major problem. So that means that there are indicators of debt sustainability. This remains favorable. The state governments have the capacity to continuously service the debt that they are taking. So in that side, there is no stress that the state governments are going to face in servicing the debt, in the debt sustainability. Okay. So despite the elevated debt levels as the percentage of the GDP, the indicators of debt sustainability remain favorable. Now coming to the demographic transition. So we have discussed about the state finances. Any confusion here? So let me just give you the brief. The ceiling that the state governments have for the fiscal deficit is 3.5%. That is inclusive of 0.5% for the power sector. Okay, 3%. This was the fiscal deficit in 2023-24, which increased to 3.3% of the fiscal deficit in 2024-25. Right. So this extra 0.3% of the fiscal deficit, it shows the extra 0.3% of the borrowing requirement for the state governments. Okay, so this extra 3% this extra 0.3% of the consolidated fiscal deficit, it shows the extra 0.3% of the borrowing requirement for the state governments. But in this category, there is no problem because this borrowing requirement is catered for the state governments by the central government. Central governments are providing, the central government is providing the state governments with the 50-year interest-free loan under its special scheme, okay, for the capital investment. So the extra borrowing requirement or the extra fiscal deficit is being covered, or this is mainly being covered through the 50-year of interest-free loans that the central government is providing to the state government. So this extra borrowing requirement is not much of a problem right now, okay. Now, but you can understand that the ceiling of the fiscal deficit, it is basically 3% plus 0.5% for the power sector reform, So in total, it is 3.5%. So this 3.3% of the fiscal deficit is still lower than the 3.5% of the ceiling. So 3.5% of the ceiling, that is 3% of the net ceiling plus 0.5% for the power sector, and this is the ceiling. And currently, the fiscal deficit is 3.3% for the state governments, okay. So that is still lower than the ceiling. Now it is said that for 2025-26 also this 3.3% of fiscal deficit will continue, but in the 2025-26 there will be higher capital expenditure that is going to happen by the state governments, as the state governments are going to increase their capital expenditure from 2.7% to 3.2%, okay. So in 2025-26 the fiscal deficit is going to remain at 3.3%, but the states are going to increase their capital expenditure from 2.7% to 3.2%. So this is the whole summary, okay. Chalo. Moving forward with the demographic transition in India. So India is currently the most populous country in world, having surpassed China in 2023. As of mid-2025, the population of India is estimated at 1.46 billion, a figure expected to reach 1.5 billion by 2036 and peak around 1.7 billion in the early 2060s, and then begin a gradual decline with the higher life expectancy, and lower fertility rate. So it is expected that slowly and slowly the life expectancy is going to further increase in India, and slowly the fertility rates are going to decrease. That we have seen in many of the states, the fertility rates are decreasing, okay. So with the lower fertility rates and with the higher life expectancy, it is expected that slowly there will be gradual decline that will come in the India's population, okay, in the long term. But before this happens, yes, we are going to have the higher population, still higher population, okay. So the further median age is the age that divides the population into two halves. So the median age of the Indian population was just around 28 years in 2022. That means half of the population, 50% of the population is below the 28 years and half of the population is above 28 years. So you can understand that we have a very, very young population where half of our population is even below 28 years. So further median age of the Indian population was just around 28 years in 2022 as compared to above 40 years in developed countries like US, Europe and South Korea. So that means the median age is above 40 years in the developed countries. So we have a very young population, as most of our population is young population, okay. So this is the idea. So India is one of the youngest large nations in the world because we have a very young median age that is only 28 years. The share of the working age population. So working age population is the population between 15 to 64 years. So this is the working age population, that is the population between 15 to 64 years. So the share of working age population in the total population of India is 64% in 2021. That is projected to peak around 65.1% in 2031. So you can understand that we have huge working age population. If this working age population is provided with the job opportunities, with the proper education, healthcare facilities, skills and vocational training, then this working age population can provide the window of opportunity, can provide the growth in the country, the fast growth in the country. Okay, so India has huge working age population, and this working age population is expected to further increase in the coming years. So if this working age population is provided with the opportunities, it can provide or it can boost the growth of the country. Okay, so the high share of the working age population provides a window of opportunity towards faster economic growth if the working age population is provided with the proper opportunities. Okay, so the working age population, higher working age population, it shows higher demographic dividend, as there can be faster growth that can be achieved with the higher working age population. Got it? Higher working age population means lower dependence. Lower dependence, because most of our population is the working age population. That means we have lower dependency ratio, we have lower dependence. Okay, the term demographic dividend here refers to the economic growth potential that we have due to the higher working age population and the lower dependence. So with the higher working age population, we have the window of opportunity, we have the growth potential. If we tap on this growth potential by providing the opportunities to the working age population, we can have very, very fast growth in the country. Okay, so this is the idea. Now the national level indicators conceal. Now these are the national level indicators, that at the national level India has the high population, working age population is very high, the young population we have, median age is just 28 years. So the national level indicators, they conceal the large interstate divergencies in demographic parameters. So as I've told you that there is the population patterns that are shifting, the population structure is shifting, specifically in certain states that we are going to discuss further. So national level indicators, they hide the large interstate differences that is present in India. The timing and pace of demographic transition, that is the population structure is changing, the population patterns are changing in various different states. In different states there are different population structures, there are different population patterns. For instance, the median age varies from 23 years in Bihar. That means the median age is 23 years in Bihar. Most of the 50% of the population is below 23 years in Bihar. Bihar has a very, very young population and a huge working age population, that we can say. While Kerala has the median age of 37 years. So that means the 50% of the population is below 37 years, and the Kerala has the aging population right now. So this is the idea, that in the states there is high differences that we can find. And to see that, these are the charts that are provided, the data is provided, that you do not have to remember, but the points you have to remember. Okay, so first of all, Indian states are at different stages of demographic transition in the population patterns, in the population structure. The Indian states are at different stages, which increasingly shape their finances. Okay, so we will discuss that how the different states are at different stages, then we will discuss that how it affects the finances of the different states. So first of all, you can understand that by 2016, most of the population, see, dark green is youthful states that have the 60 plus population less than 10%. White or light green shows the intermediate states that have 60 plus population, more than or equal to 10%, but less than 15%. Okay, aging states have 60 plus population, more than or equal to 15%. So this is the idea. So green, dark green means youthful states. Light green or the white kind of like the light green, they shows the light green, it shows the intermediate states, and the red shows the aging states. So by 2016, and this white shows that the data is not very secured, or the data is not very much provided. Okay, so the white plus the light green, it basically shows the intermediate states. The dark green, it shows the youthful states, and the aging population is your red. Okay, now for the union territories, the data is not very clear, that's why they are not taken into consideration much here. It is particularly for the states. Chalo. Now here you can see that in 2016 all the states were in the category of youthful or intermediate states, but by 2026 Kerala and Tamil Nadu, they are expected to enter the aging category with more than 15% of the population above 60 years of age. Most of the remaining states are in the light green category or white category. That means they are in intermediate category. So most of the remaining states will be in the intermediate category, and a few dark green states that you can see, a few dark green states under the youthful category during this period. By 2036, dark green, you cannot see dark green here. So by 2036, more than half of the states will be aging. So more than half of the states will be aging, and the rest will fall under the intermediate category with no states remaining in the youthful category. So this is the idea. Got it? So this is the changing patterns or the population patterns that are different in different states. In different states, the population patterns are changing, the population structure is changing, and in some states, the aging has already started or it is going to start in the short term. While in some states, they are in the intermediate category, and in other states, they are in youthful category. But if we see for the long term, most of the states will be in the aging category, or a lot of states will be in the aging category, and the other states will be in the intermediate category with no state that will remain in the youthful category by 2036. So this is the idea. Now what happens if a state is in the youthful category, or a state is in intermediate category, or if a state is in aging category? So Indian states are at different stages of demographic transition which increasingly shape their finances. Youthful states have a wider window of opportunity because they have young population. So they have more working age population, they have more window of opportunity. Due to an expanding working age population, so youthful states, they have a wider window of opportunity due to expanding working age population and stronger revenue mobilization. Because if the working age population is more, there is higher more number of people that are working, so they will provide the tax. So revenue mobilization is also more. Okay, revenue collection is also more, which can be harnessed through higher investment in human capital. Now if we want to use this working age population, so first of all, there should be higher investment in the human capital. There should be higher investment in the human beings by providing them with the proper education, healthcare facilities, skill training and such. And that's why it is said that the youthful states have to spend the maximum in education. Okay, they have to spend a large chunk in education. Next, in contrast, so in the intermediate states, they need to balance both priorities with early preparation for aging. So intermediate states, they are at the middle, and they have the young population, they have the working age population, okay, and they should also spend on education, of higher education and such. But the intermediate states, they have to be prepared for moving towards the aging stage. Now, when a state is in the aging state, that means the aging states, they face narrowing window of opportunity as they have very less working age population. With fiscal pressures, the pressures are coming because of the lesser working age population. There is lesser tax base. Lesser working age population means lesser tax base and rising committed expenditure on the pensions, on the social security and such. So you can understand that the youthful states, they have the higher working age population, they have the higher young population, and they have the more opportunity for tax collection. Okay, so with higher, like they have the stronger revenue mobilization, they have stronger revenue collection, which can be harnessed, which can be improved through, like the working age population can be improved through higher investment in human capital, education, healthcare facilities, skill development and such. If the working age population is provided with better education, better skill development, they can provide more in the society. The working age population can provide more growth, more production, more goods and services, more value addition that can help in further tax collection. Okay, so youthful states, they have a very good window of opportunity if provided with the right kind of boost to the working age population. The youthful states can get a lot of tax mobilization, they can get a lot of benefits. But at the same time, the young states, youthful states, they have to spend a lot in education, skill development and such. In contrast, the aging states, they face a narrowing window because the aging stage has very less working age population or has lesser working age population and more dependents. With fiscal pressure arising from, because they have less working age population, so they can have less tax base, okay, shrinking tax base, and they are more committed to provide pension, because if there is larger dependents, larger aging population. So that means pensions will have to be provided, social security benefits have to be provided and such. Healthcare has to be improved and such. Intermediate states, they are in the middle. They have the working age population, they have the youthful population also, but they have to be prepared for moving towards the aging stage. Okay. And why do we have that by 2036 we will have more of the aging population and the intermediate population? This is because the fertility rates are decreasing, as well as there is the improvement in the life expectancy, and with the better healthcare facilities, better life expectancy will be achieved. So this is the idea. Now the publication, now this report has been prepared in the Division of State Finances in the Department of Economic and Policy Research. So the DEPR, this is the Department of RBI, Division of State Finances, that has prepared this report. The current issue along with the past issue of the report are available on the RBI website. Any confusion, anyone? So this is it for today, and I hope this is clear. This is the first question. I hope you will be easily able to answer this question. The basic idea or the basic theme you need to know. The theme you need to know for the report. The second question is encompassing whatever we have studied in today's session. So the different data points that are important from this report, as well as the understanding that we have got about the youthful, aging and intermediate population. So this is the idea. Now in this particular report, in this particular session, I have provided you the idea about the descriptive. So if a question comes on demographic transition and the states, the difference in the states in demographic transition, so you will have the data to write that okay, Kerala and Tamil Nadu by 2026, Kerala and Tamil Nadu, they are expected to enter the aging category, and by 2036 most of the states will be in the category of aging or intermediate, and there will be no youthful category. But still, in case of India, if we see the totality of India, we have the youngest population, or we are the youngest large nation in the world, and we have a median age of 28 years in 2022. Some states have even lower median age, some states have higher median age, but if we see for the whole of the country, the median age is 28 years. So you can use all these data points in your answer writing. Okay, as well as we have also discussed about the state finances, and we have discussed about the fiscal deficit, the capital expenditure. These are the main areas that you need to keep in mind. Okay, so this is it. Thank you everyone. Thank you for joining. I hope you enjoyed the session, and now let's meet in the next session on Thursday. Thank you everyone.